I will tell you, this team right here is going to put the fun in funding. Are you ready? Are you guys ready?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Todd, where's Todd? The last speaker? Holy cow, you brought me down, bro. I mean, geez. I mean, like, holy cow, I'm going to mess this up. You made me nervous. All right. Are we good? All right. It looks like I'm John Timney, Executive Director, Washington County Authority. I told SPC they shouldn't do this, but they gave me a mic. So instead of introducing everyone, I'm just going to right to left here. Who are you? What are you doing here?
I'm not sure.
Pass.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Brandon Carson, Executive Director of the Broadband Authority here in Pennsylvania. And it's good to be here with you this morning to talk about all things broadband. Excited for the conversation.
My name is Robert Fry. I'm the General Field Representative for USDA, the Rural Utility Service, our Telecom division. I handle all things related to broadband programs in the state of Pennsylvania, New York, and all of New England. Looking forward to talking to you all.
Hello, my name is Curtis Hansen. I am ARC's Program Manager for Broadband. I've been in the role for about 1.5 years, so I'm newer to Appalachia as a region. I'm newer to this side of the country. I grew up out west. My background is in broadband, but on the ISP side. So I worked for an internet service provider that operated out west. We also had operations in the Caribbean, Alaska, a bunch of random places. I ran the network planning team. So I was responsible for running the business cases, ranking them top to bottom, and drawing the line, which was a hard role to fill. It was even harder than to meet with those communities that were below the line, who you had to explain to how their community just wasn't profitable enough. The flip side of that, though, is that I got to then work with them to find funding opportunities. So I got to lead our company's participation in everything from E-rate to the Connect America Fund auction. I ran the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund auction. And I checked last night because I thought it would be interesting. I actually put together a bid for over 50% of the RDOF eligible locations for the counties covered by SPC. So I know that this region has the need. I know that it has the promise, and I'm excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's so nice to see so many of you in person. My name is Nicole Ugarte. I'm the Federal Program Officer for Pennsylvania with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. It's a really long way of saying that if you've heard of BEAD, if you've heard of the Digital Equity Act, if you've heard a lot of money going into broadband right now, I'm a person that you should be talking to. My background is really in getting different levels of government to work together. I spent the last 10, 12 years working in interoperability and emergency services and communications in, 47 out of the 56 states and territories. So it's really wonderful to be able to focus on my home state of Pennsylvania and really work with all of you to figure out how we're going to get everyone affordable and reliable access to high-speed internet.
So SPC asked me to introduce everyone, but I couldn't pronounce Appalachia, and I couldn't pronounce Nicole's last name. So that's why I delegated.
Still can, it's okay.
Right, that's why I said Nicole. Okay, so, sort of conference 101, don't put the speaker right before lunch. And so that's what we have. We're in the way of your lunch, but we feel that with this funding opportunity we have here, there's a varied different opportunities we have. So I was going to start with Nicole, but Brandon, why don't you go ahead and start? What do we have here? We have a plethora of different opportunities. Wanted each of you to talk about your organization first, and then the programmatic approach to this funding.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So in terms of the authority, I don't want to get into too much detail on the authority. Unfortunately for you all, you have to listen to me on this panel this morning. And then also Dr. Kopko and I have a panel this afternoon. We're going to dig a little more into the work of the authority and some of our governing actions that we're working on now. But for purposes of this panel, we're really focused in on the funding. And Nicole mentioned BEAD, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. There's been so much focus on on BEAD in recent months for obvious reasons. $42.5 billion available nationally. An enormous amount of funding to make a huge difference. We heard it from panelists this morning. I think many of them said it well. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we need to ensure that we're doing our due diligence as we prepare to roll those dollars out here in the coming years. So the runway for the BEAD program specifically is a little longer than some may like, myself included. You know, there's a lot of anxiety in this space right now, and I can understand that. We get inquiries, calls, emails on a daily basis as it relates to timing. So that's something that I certainly want to talk a little bit about this morning. Many of you are likely aware of the challenge process the FCC just kind of undertook, and they're working through the adjudication of challenges that were submitted now. The FCC map is going to be used to determine how that $42.5 billion in BEAD funds will be allocated to each of the states. So NTIA and our friends there, Nicole and others, have committed to June 30th as a date that BEAD funds will be allocated. So June 30th of this year, we should have a sense for what Penn State's allocation of that $42.5 billion will be. So what happens in the meantime and what happens beyond that June 30 date? We've been charged with the development of a 5-year action plan for BEAD. That will serve as a roadmap for making these investments in our communities to ensure that we are adequately connecting our communities. That work is underway now. We have started our stakeholder engagement process. We are working to onboard a consultant or consultants to help with that effort this spring and into this summer. By mid-August, we have to have a plan that is developed in place and submitted to NTIA for review and approval. So there's a significant amount of planning work that has to happen in the coming months leading up to that August deadline. Once those plans are in place and approved, the state then makes initial application to NTIA for our share of funding. From there, we can start to stand up our grant programs to start to put some of these dollars on the ground in your communities. So we're working through some of those details now on what these programs will look like. We're meeting with a lot of different stakeholders, gathering as much input as we can on that process for future guidelines. And that's going to be an evolving, iterative process. But looking ahead to 2024 is when the majority of these funds will start to hit. We'll receive our initial allocation in 2024, hopefully, and then we will begin to make those investments at that point moving forward from 2024 and beyond. So that's kind of the timeline for BEAD from the state broadband authority's perspective.
How about let's go to Nicole for a second. I probably should have started with you, Nicole. Is there an umbrella above that then feeds down to the Commonwealth?
So I'll turn the mic closer to me so everybody can hear. Wave at me if you can't quite hear me. So Brandon talked about the $42 billion. That is the umbrella amount that the U.S. Congress gave to this program, in addition to $2.75 billion for the Digital Equity Act, which we consider as part of this Internet for All program. There's also the Middle Mile program, the Tribal Broadband Connectivity program, et cetera. But I think overall, when we talk about BEAD, certainly there's an infrastructure component, but I love a dad joke, and we talk so much that BEAD without equity is just bad. So the equity, thank you. Yes, I got some laughs there. You all win. Gold stars for the day.
Here's your prop.
Yeah. There you go, exactly. See, we can just take it out. The point is, though, that there's a lot of focus on the infrastructure component. That is absolutely true. The allocation is determined by building out to these unserved and underserved areas. On top of that, digital equity has to happen in conjunction with these infrastructure programs. What good is a fiber line running to a community if there's no adoption there? How do we really understand what the needs are unless we're working with community members? Dropped my glasses, it's fine. To piggyback on what Brandon was saying, there's a couple of components about the BEAD program, Broadband Equity, Access and Deployment, that I think are really important for you to know. Number one, we're learning from past grant programs. Brandon and his team are going to have to submit an initial proposal for us to approve before Pennsylvania receives their funding. So unlike other grant programs, Pennsylvania will have to tell us what the plan is before the money is received, right? We have to make sure it's viable. I think things, are in good shape so far, right? But I think that that's a good check to make sure that we're using these dollars efficiently. There's also a requirement for local coordination and stakeholder engagement. So nowhere in the country can any of these plans be developed just at the state level, just in a black box. Everybody is required to talk to communities across the geography, across the different community demographics in their state, and it has to be a transparent process that you all are aware of and that we're aware of. I think that those are really key components that will feed into the digital equity part of BEAD. And on top of that, knowing that there's a lot of infrastructure going on, particularly in Pennsylvania, there is BEAD's cousin program, the Digital Equity Act, which is a series of 3 different grants that support specifically digital equity programs in the state. So this is all a lot. It's very complicated and annoying, but it's my job to make sure that this is accessible, that all of you can know as much about it as Brandon and I do. So you too can memorize the 94-page NOFO if you're so inclined.
So there's a lot related to BEAD. We probably should save some time for that. But Robert, how are you putting fun in funding?
Well, so the rural
You did this,
utility
Vince. You did this. You gave me the mic.
So the Rural Utility Services was created in the Rural Electrification Act. So we've been doing it since 1938, I believe. And we started with last mile electricity. We funded a lot of electric cooperatives that are still in business today. In the 50s and 60s, we switched to telephones, and we did a lot of the local exchanges and telephone cooperatives. And so now we're focused on broadband. And so we have a long history of success in building out this type of thing to last mile. The Reconnect program is the primary conduit by which we're bringing broadband to rural areas. It's created by the Farm Bill. It's tend to be large awards. It takes several components. There's a loan-only component where you can borrow at 2% interest for upwards about 20 years, depending on the underlying collateral. There's a combination of loan and grant. 50% of it is a loan, 50% of it's a grant. The loan component is what we call cost of funds. Cost of funds would be the corresponding treasury rate for that term. And the other parts are grant only. There's a grant with a 25% match. That has different thresholds than some grants we have, which are no match. So it depends on what you apply for. We have the grants with which there's no match. There's 2 types. One is you're going to have socially vulnerable communities where you're going to be bringing service to those, and we have a mapping tool that will tell you that is indeed one of those communities. You don't have to do the demographics yourself. The other is you're defining your service areas at 90% threshold, meaning they're underserved at 90%. And our latest funding opportunity announcement, otherwise we call it FOA, defines sufficient speed as 100 by 20 symmetrical terrestrial system. So if you're in an area that's 90% unserved at those speeds, we can fund 100% grant. We just closed a round. The top line number is hard to determine because we're still working through how much of the loans we want to fund, how much of the combinations. There's a subsidy rate that's calculated in, but we're typically funded by Congress every year, and that's the primary way we fund projects. We have a secondary project which is coming up in March. We're expecting the funding opportunity to come out in March. It's called our Community Connect program. It's basically Reconnect on a smaller level. It's a grant-only program. It's a $4 million award. There's a 15% match, a lot less strings attached. The difference is that in this program, you can only draw one service area. And within that service area, there can be no households with sufficient service, which is a 25 by 3. So it's a little bit different program, a little bit different standards, but less strings attached to it. And that's coming out in March. The last round we did is interesting because you think, oh, well, we're oversubscribed and all this stuff. The last round we did in Community Connect, we funded everything that was eligible. There were some that were determined to be ineligible. I wish I had worked with them. I probably could have helped that. But those are the primary programs by which we deliver internet. And how we do it is, as your general field representative, we have a little bit different way of operating. I'm attached to the project from your first phone call where you're thinking about what you want to do right through the end of the grant where it's terminated, your system's lit up. I'm there the whole time. I'll be attached to a project maybe for 7 years. So that's how we operate. And so as your general field representative, I'm the person you talk to initially, ongoing, after funding, et cetera. That's how we're structured.
Thank you. Curtis?
Yeah, so, in terms of Internet for All funding, that's what we're talking about, right? John?
Yes, yes.
Excellent.
Or fun. You can
Yeah,
have-
fun, the fun aspect of that. So I don't know, has anyone checked out the Internet for All website? It's pretty flashy, right? It's out in that it has good information. It's very clearly laid out. If you go through the list, you won't see ARC among the named programs of the Internet for All, umbrella. But ARC has been named in certain special ways in the language that define those programs. And they go back to ARC's roots, right? ARC is a convener. We're an advocate. We are here to help with building capacity in the region to make sure that the region is successful. So while NTIA and Brandon's team at the Broadband Authority are concerned with helping Pennsylvania as a whole be successful with BEAD and with these other federal programs, ARC is here to make sure that the Appalachian portion of this state is prioritized and make sure that they have all the resources they need to be successful in those programs. We'll continue funding broadband projects just like we always have. We spend about $30 million a year on broadband grants these days. Greene County, great example of an ARC grantee. Another unique thing about ARC when it comes to the Internet for All programs, and specifically BEAD, is that ARC dollars are eligible to be used as match for BEAD grants, which is unique among other federal agencies. Have we defined how that's going to work yet? No. We still have time to do that, though, and we're working to make that a goal for this year to make it a little easier, a little bit more streamlined for folks to figure out how to thread that needle so they're not having to swim upstream and figure that out on their own.
So I would imagine a lot of people have questions. So again, following the same instructions, put them on an index card, send them up. I will tell you that for us in the Washington County Authority, we're all in. But at the same time, it is very confusing to navigate through all this. How does the entities, be it county, municipality, whomever, how do they navigate this? So I actually open it to anyone here. How do we navigate the plethora of opportunities, the once in a generation, once in a lifetime opportunity here, but how do we navigate it?
I'll jump in.
Yeah, you start.
There are a lot of flavors of funding at play. And it is something that can be overwhelming for some as you get started, especially at the local level where this work is so important. We heard from some great panelists this morning about great work that's being done locally, planning and now implementation work. I think that's an important first step. You have to better understand locally where you have areas of need. Where do you have those unserved or underserved areas? From there, you can begin to match up relevant funding sources for that particular need. And that has been done very well by some counties and localities across the Commonwealth. So moving forward, I had mentioned the 5-year action plan at the outset, and our efforts to onboard a consultant or consultants to help us through that heavy lift that needs to take place here in the coming months leading up to August, we will be reaching out to you. You will be hearing from us at the Broadband Authority. We will be looking for your input throughout that process. I can't stress that enough. Nicole mentioned it. We will be reaching out early and often as we develop our plans. We are committed to being transparent with the development of those plans, and we absolutely want and need your input in that process. Keeping in mind, that will be the plan that is utilized to make investments of that $42 billion, at least Pennsylvania's share of that $42 billion. But it also is going to help us with some of these other flavors of funding as we're trying to align funding resources, leverage resources to the extent we can, especially when we're factoring in match requirements. BEAD does require 25% match, but we have the ability to couple that with other dollars, other federal dollars, to ensure that the project is made whole and that areas with limited resources are able to put these projects on the ground with limited resources.
Yeah, I'll just add, we get a lot of requests about broadband projects and different ideas. And now that all the states have broadband offices, we are moving more and more to pointing people that come and ask us questions directly back to their state, because they're the ones with a 5-year action plan. They're the ones with the goal and mandate to solve the digital divide in their constituency. ARC is just here to support them in that goal. One example of that, the Power RFP, if you're familiar with ARC's funding programs, the Power RFP was just released. There's a new requirement in there that anyone who wants to apply for broadband funding through Power go coordinate with their state broadband office before they put in an application, because we don't want to get in the way of the state's plan. It would be a real shame if you tripped over a dollar trying to pick up our dime, right? Mm-hmm. So we really are trying to support the states and would recommend folks go to the states first as they start down this funding journey.
I'll just add, again, when we're talking about BEAD, when we're talking about digital equity dollars, it can be frustrating to hear, well, the money won't hit our communities until sometime next year. I'll often get questions like, well, why are we talking about it now? Why have you been talking about it for so long, Nicole? It's really important it's never too early to start your planning. I think we're really trying to do something different with this amount of money. We're not going to see this amount of money again, I believe, in our lifetimes. And I think there's tremendous opportunity to have it work in conjunction with everything else that's happening at the same time, right? Threading the programs together. And so I can't emphasize enough, yes, work through Brandon and the Pennsylvania Broadband Development Authority. Amazing group of people who are truly committed to hearing your voice and want to understand where you're coming from. Look at, if we're trying to solve difficult challenges that have not been solved yet, look at what might be some unconventional partnerships in your community. Look at certainly what the needs are in your community, but also look at what assets you do have, what are the things that you can bring to the table and how you can align those to partners you otherwise wouldn't have partnered with before. Certainly, again, this is a significant amount of money, but what money is ever enough, right? So to make sure it's used the most effectively, I think we see amazing models when partnerships are really built, folks can come together. I'm always here to answer any questions. You'll often hear me redirect you also to the Broadband Authority, but start thinking about, when the funding comes, things will move very, very quickly. And so if you can have the time to think creatively now, I really encourage you, talk to people, see what you want accomplished in your community now.
Our applications are basically designed around the applicant determining their own service areas. And so we've got a pretty state-of-the-art mapping tool where applicants go in and we call them, you can call them polygons or shape files, whatever you want to call them, and you draw your shape file of where you intend to bring service. And basically, it's a claim. When you draw a shape file and you say, we would like to bring service to this area, the map tool pulls through all the data through those census tracts, does all the calculations for you, determines the population density, determines the economic need, does it all for you. But at the end of the day, you really should know where you want to bring service because you're going to live or die by those maps. And the shape files will determine the service area, the amount of funding, and the amount of, and a lot of times how competitive the grant score is going to be. So that's the biggest thing. We have a mapping tool you can go on tomorrow. I don't like sending people to websites. That's not what I'm here to do. Go to our website and figure it out for yourself. But the mapping tool is there if you want to get an idea of where you could bring service. But that's the biggest key is knowing where you're going to bring service so that when you get to that point where you're drawing these maps, they're square. Yeah, because we do define sufficient service certain ways in different programs, and that's the biggest barrier. We've awarded projects where they made mistakes. We have a county who drew maps in which one side of the street is getting service and the other side isn't. And as a county government, they have to explain to those folks on the other side of the street why they're not getting internet. Because we only fund what you draw. And so that's the main thing as far as getting started, if you ask me.
Thank you. Well, we got a bunch of questions already. Robert, the first question is, what's your zodiac sign?
Virgo?
Virgo, mine is too.
Yeah.
Nicole, I'm going to butcher this. I apologize
that
in
a real
advance. What has been your experience with labor standards and broadband build-outs? The NTIA NOFO has strong labor standards and labor enforcement language. Does that make sense based on your experience?
That's a great question. Thank you to whomever asked it. I'll say our discussion on labor is ever evolving. A couple of you have already heard me say a couple times that we're building the plane as we're flying it, truly. I think I mentioned to somebody earlier this morning that I am person number 3 on the BEAD program. There was the director, one of my other colleagues, and then Pennsylvania got assigned first because we're the best. I just hit my 1-year anniversary at NTIA. So if I'm considered the veteran after 1 year, you can imagine how we have tripled in size over the last 6 months. We are pulling everything together as quickly as you're trying to pull everything together for our programs. So in terms of the labor standards, what's in the NOFO is our guiding language, right? Projects over $5 million will have additional reporting, but we ultimately support whatever states put in their initial proposal as long as it's within the guidelines that we have in that NOFO. So states have a lot of flexibility to determine what works best for the projects that need to happen there. Certainly, we have a perspective in the NOFO of what would make the most sense. But there is the flexibility there. The additional reporting mechanisms are not anything more than you would already have as part of your standard payroll. So hopefully it's not too onerous.
All right, we got popcorn popping over here. I need 2 sets of glasses. Question, are you looking into workforce development aspects, the broadband deployment, to ensure Pennsylvanians are trained to install and maintain the state like the state of Maine is doing right now? Anyone?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. So, workforce and supply chain concerns are paramount. We can have all the resources in the world, and if we don't have the adequate workforce to deploy these networks, and our partners that we would award funds to aren't able to get equipment, it's all for naught. So we're using the time we have now. I mentioned the runway is longer than some of us would like, in a way that is a good thing, that gives us time to prepare on this front. Specifically with workforce, we've stood up a workforce and supply chain subcommittee to focus on those 2 particular issues. Right now, there's a lot of work being done to inventory existing apprenticeship programs that may be existing. Where are there gaps and needs for additional programs? We're aware of the work that's been done in Maine. In fact, the team and I were in DC last week with Nicole and our friends at NTIA, and I believe we had folks from 47 of the states participate in those discussions. I had the opportunity to talk with some other states, compare notes, share some best practices on the workforce front. And we took a lot back from those conversations that we want to share out with the subcommittee that we've charged with that work. But I think it's important to remember that we do have some time on that front. So that's what we're going to use this year for planning, standing up that 5-year action plan, and getting ready on some of these important issues like workforce and supply chain.
I'll add that the action plan, I think, will build the roadmap for you, but ARC funds workforce development projects regularly. We funded a broadband workforce development project in Ohio just a few months ago. So ARC is very invested in helping make sure that the workforce needs are met for these types of initiatives as well.
I think you guys just answered this, but maybe the audience member can clarify. With the amount of money being allocated, we're getting a surge in supply chain needs when everyone starts requesting how and what will they need to deliver. Did I get that right? But it feels like you just asked it or answered it, but maybe you didn't. I mean, I'm more on the supplier side with Crown Castle was my background, but I look over here at DQE, Comcast. When are they ordering that fiber? So you have miles and miles. Just in Washington County, we have, I think, about 700 miles that we plan to build out in the next 18, 24 months. So that's 700 miles, and then that's just the fiber. That's probably the easiest aspect to describe. So where else in the supply chain are we having problems, and what can we do to address them?
Well, our projects, we're seeing huge delivery issues with fiber. I'm hearing horror stories of 20 months. That's not in New York or PA.
Can you speak up, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. We're hearing long delivery times for fiber right now. 20 months is what I've heard out west. I've not experienced that in the projects in the Northeast, but that's my counterparts have been telling me that. We've had other issues with getting equipment in. One of the barriers, and I'll just tell you, is we are Buy American compliant. And so not everything is Buy American compliant. You have to get a waiver, which is not controlled by us. And we've been very good about getting the waivers. It's just that it's time consuming, right? You have to do this, you got to file certain things. It could be based on your network or it could be based on cost. And if you're going to get cost, you need to get other quotes, and then here we go. So that's been another supply chain issue as well. We have networks that have to have Nokia, and it just doesn't work without it. So we have to get a waiver. And so that's been a drag time on that.
I'm going to further butcher this. Is it Evan? Is it Evan that's at NTIA? He was on
Yes.
he was on a podcast yesterday. Did a great
Evan
job.
Feynman, yes.
Two things that he was one. I'll just go back to the Buy American thing. He was yes, it's important, but don't let it get in your way. Is what I think I heard from him on that podcast. Does that sound consistent?
Yes, I'll say that my dear boss's line with I think everything in this program is like, look at what we're trying to accomplish, right? Ultimately, it's we need to ensure that everyone has access to affordable, reliable, high-speed internet, right? And so in service of the goal of that program, let's see what we need to do to make that work. What is getting in the way? I'd say if you see barriers to that goal within this program, pick up the phone and give me a call. Let's figure it out. Pick up the phone, call Brandon. There are things that we are tied to that we cannot change. There are things that we do not have a lot of influence over, such as supply chain issues. I know that that is a huge priority for the Commerce Department, though. So, by sharing what your needs and your challenges are, we can elevate it and see what other resources we have to try to ameliorate the issue. So keep the conversation going. Let's figure it out in service of the ultimate goal of the program.
We do. So I love rookie questions. So this is the rookie question. Someone said, beyond counties and municipalities, what role do school districts have to play, especially in the rural areas?
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. School districts oftentimes have a very good understanding of areas of need, at least in my experience. I spent 15 years working with local governments and nonprofits, and we did a lot of work with school districts. And as I kind of cut my teeth in the broadband space several years ago, it was evident to me that the districts were a huge resource as we tried to identify some of the areas of need and to better understand what those needs meant to the students in those districts. So I think the districts have been a great resource and will continue to be. They're certainly going to be part of our outreach and engagement strategy for the 5-year action plan.
I'll add something real quick.
Please.
With school districts, I work with them all the time. We have a separate program called distance learning grants. And it's not applicable to, unfortunately, I've been to see areas where they have no sufficient broadband. I can't help them because this is for once it's built, right? But keep that in mind with your school districts. We have a very, very healthy program called distance learning grants. And it's a great opportunity to get equipment in that'll provide live interactive content between teachers and students. We pay for all of it, to install the whole thing. Just keep that in mind. Just want to add that.
All right. We did a snap poll real quick and confirmed with Lance Grable, Beaver County is the best, but right behind it is Washington County, close second. So just for the record, is Lance out there?
I think you guys should battle it out.
I'm in a small borough neighboring more rural communities in Armstrong, Butler, and Allegheny counties. Would partnering with them to look at a regional development be encouraged in this process? I want to answer this too, but I would like to hear someone else.
Yeah, from the authority's perspective, absolutely. One program I haven't mentioned, we've been talking mostly about BEAD, at least in this segment. I can provide you with some additional details this afternoon when Dr. Kopko and I talk with you. We have $279 million available through the American Rescue Plan that was allocated to the Commonwealth. Those funds are sitting with the authority. We're in the process of developing guidelines and standing up 3 new grant programs, the first of which is $200 million for a core infrastructure program. So a component of that program, one is a line extension piece to look at areas where we have low-hanging fruit. We get calls on a regular basis about folks that are located a few blocks or a half a mile or a quarter mile off of the end of an existing line. And they could access that service if, in fact, they could afford the $15,000, $20,000 to extend that line. So the first part of that $200 million is to get some of that low-hanging fruit and look for project proposals to extend those existing lines, whether they be coax or fiber. And then the second piece of it, the program focuses on the regional aspect. And back to the question, John, we're encouraging folks to look at these solutions regionally. Talk with your neighbors. There are efficiencies of scale, without a doubt. When it makes sense, the partnership has to make sense for all parties. But we're absolutely encouraging folks to look at some of these solutions from a regional standpoint, and we plan on investing dollars appropriately. Again, a portion of that $200 million will be allocated for regional projects.
So I don't know this person's background, but I'll tell you firsthand. So I came into this space about a year and a half ago. I worked for Crown Castle for 22 years, wearing the Crown Castle socks. By the way, if you need socks, talk to Tom Musgrove. He has a bunch of socks. So I will say with seriousness, we are looking at it from a regional perspective. SPC has crushed it. We have worked with Michael Baker. I have texted Jeremy more times than I can count of what's his advice. Our first call was to actually, is Lance in here? Yeah, my first call was to Lance. Sat down, he took a half a day to spend with us to give us a little bit. Another call was to Commissioner Belding related to how did you get that money from the private oh, there you are right there. So we are taking a regional approach. Whoever asked that question, SBC has been forefront, I would say, in this space. In my experience, I haven't seen an organization like SPC to aggregate all this inertia and put it with analytics that Michael Baker can put it and then be our advocate. I mean, even down to that middle mile that we actually tried for, or hopefully we're still in the running for, it was very impressive. We had multiple ISPs in the room, and there was no pride. It was, how do we get unserved served, period, end. And so my point, I don't know where the root of this is coming from, but in my perspective, I've been seeing it in spades. Vince? I got you. All right. Okay, so I'm sure BEAD could probably take another minute or two. Do we want to go a little deeper with BEAD? Eligibility, you talked about timeline.
I'll just add, think about what the types of projects would contribute to, again, the goal of the program. So certainly you'll hear a lot of information about infrastructure, but also looking at when the digital, the equity capacity grant comes out next year, we're looking at digital literacy programs, making sure that folks have access to equipment and software. I mean, don't feel constrained by what you've seen before. Think about the goal in mind and what your community needs, and how does that serve, again, how does that address the barriers that folks experience? Well, I think we talk a lot about folks who don't want high-speed internet. And I think the challenge at NTIA that we talk about is we need to better understand those folks' lived experience and how might this technology better enrich their lives. And how can we meet folks where they are? I think my grandmother is an excellent example. She did not care about online banking. She did not care about Skype. It was too weird for her. But as soon as she found out that she could watch soccer and that she could attend mass via the computer, oh my gosh, best thing in the world. She thought it was absolutely magical, right? And so it just took us meeting her where she was to be able to understand what her values were. And those activities were just as valuable as telemedicine, as online banking, as developing a business at home, right? This is about making sure we're meeting folks where they are in their community. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what gets developed in Pennsylvania. How can we creatively address so many of these challenges? There's so much information that is out there. There's a lot of opportunity. This is going to be a long-term project. It's a marathon at a sprint's pace, I can tell you that much. Certainly, you can go to internetforall.gov. You can go to broadbandusa.ntia.gov. You can also just email me. And we have a technical assistance branch, all sorts of materials. If I don't know the answer, there are so many people I work with that are so much smarter than me. Let me connect you to them, and we'll get you the right answer. But ultimately, I want to know, what is important to all of you, what's important to your communities, and how can NTIA support you?
So do you happen to know that the podcast is it Evan?
Yes.
It was on yesterday. Do you know that one?
Yes.
What one's that?
I don't remember the name.
Okay, so the information I have or seen is I'm getting bombarded because you sign up for all these different things, you're getting bombarded. I will tell you that he did a great job yesterday on that the podcast, and then afterwards they put the top 10 things you should have that Evan basically shared. One of them is tied to this. Let me put the glasses back on. Sorry. Nicole, Brandon, are there any conversations around how we can leverage these funds, and they specifically call out with BEAD, et cetera? One, before you take it, one of his top 10 issue is don't forget about in-kind. So there's a lot, you have the capital contribution from the vendor, you have your match, you have them, but his advice was don't forget about in-kind. So whoever, Brandon, Nicole.
Do you want to take it first, or?
Yeah, I can. In terms of leveraging other funds, and I think I understand the question, and really would ask Curtis to potentially jump in terms of other dollars like ARC funds or USDA funds. There are opportunities to leverage those programs for BEAD. Now, it can get a bit complicated when you're developing your scopes. So if you have projects that are moving forward now, obviously that's problematic whenever you're looking at a future BEAD application, right? Because you can't marry those two funding sources if you've already kind of started down that path and you have expenditures, unless there is a logical way to phase those projects. So as you're doing your planning work now locally, and as we start to gear up for the development of this 5-year action plan with all of you, start to think in those terms. Maybe you have some funds right now, you have some ARPA dollars that you've secured from your counties. And you have done your due diligence. You understand what the next steps are and how you want to implement some of these investments. You can get started with ARPA. You can get started with ARC dollars or other funds that you may have already secured, but plan for a BEAD investment down the road. Know that the dollars are coming and that you should try to look out over the next, not even the next year. We have 4 years of BEAD implementation, Nicole. So, look out multiple years as you're planning these investments. And that's what we intend to do on the state level. And again, we will be connecting with you all and trying to help with those conversations locally as we try to get a framework in place to wrap our arms around this with the resources that are available.
I will say, in Washington, I want to bring Curtis and Robert in too, but from Washington County perspective, that's hard because we're blessed with a little bit of ARPA money, and we have the ability, we have the plan, we have the resources, and you sort of have the bird in the hand with beats two in the bush, right? Mm-hmm. It's difficult to try to manage when we have the funds now. So that's our problem, and we're blessed to have that problem related to the ARPA, but that's our current challenge. Robert or Curtis, do you have anything to add here? I want to make sure we're bringing you in. Yeah, as we're talking about leveraging resources. So I'll give you a specific example in Pennsylvania. So there's an applicant a little bit northeast of here in a county, and they're proposing to do last mile for most of the county that's unserved. They're a current RDOF awardee, and they are actively funded, which we normally would say, well, okay, well, let's be careful because you're being actively funded. In this case, it worked out. The reason is because all the funds that they were awarded for that RDOF for this area are operational, where we're providing capital expenditures. And so it's up to the applicant to keep that separate, to keep their books and to make sure they manage that properly. But we're allowing this to go forward, even though they're in an actively funded RDOF area. It just makes sense. We're covering one part, they're covering the other. Everyone's going to get internet in Warren County. So that's a great idea of how we can leverage resources.
Brandon teed me up again on the match. So we do intend to get that equation figured out and that information pushed down through the Broadband Authority, through the ARC, kind of chain of command all the way down to the local level. Our big challenge right now is that ARC money can only really go to what ARC considers eligible entities. So that's governments or nonprofits. And that doesn't work for a lot of projects because they want to give the money and the asset to their private partner. And there's some creative approaches that you can take, but in general, that's our big challenge right now and something that we're working on to figure out.
And on the match, just to add to that, Curtis, the ARPA dollars can be used as that 25% match that will be required of BEAD. So keep that in mind as well as you're planning your projects.
I don't really see a question, but maybe this just rings a bell. Curtis mentioned E-rate program for schools and libraries. I don't know if there's a specific question, but do you want to elaborate on that E-rate?
Yeah, so E-rate's a program that's been around for a while. It's one of the Universal Service Fund programs run by the FCC. Schools are able to get broadband service. I think now they're also able to get devices. They were funding, at the time I was still on the ISP side, we were funding Wi-Fi connectivity for buses so kids could do homework on the way home or to school. So E-rate's a great program. There's a lot of if your school districts aren't participating in that, I'd ask them to look at it for sure.
This next one, I think it's fiber providers, maybe internet service providers, but I'll just read it. As providers, what would you suggest for being involved in these opportunities early? And where are we needed and where we are coverage to support this grant initiative?
So We intend on engaging the providers in our outreach and engagement process. Obviously, that is already underway. We have representation on the various subcommittees that we've stood up, and I can share some more details on that this afternoon. But in terms of work that can be done now, as you can imagine, I mentioned the anxiety that exists in this space, and I understand why. We respect that. Folks want to be doing their due diligence now to ensure that they can hit the ground running when programs are stood up and we're ready to start rolling out BEAD funds. I think it's important that providers are talking with local governments. We heard this morning about a lot of the great planning work that's being done to better understand the needs in our communities. And I would encourage the providers to be at those tables as the local officials are working through. I know there's been a lot of good work done on this part of the state as it relates to some of those partnerships and those early conversations with providers. So we absolutely encourage that now. You can't start too early on that engagement front with your providers and your communities.
If I can add on to that, I mean, can't underscore that boldly enough. Anything that we've said about finding partnerships and working on planning, that goes to community organizations, local governments, but certainly ISPs also. I would also say that our provider friends in the room, you have a unique perspective on some of the challenges to broadband readiness in the communities in which you serve. And so I think your voice is really valuable. Make sure that you're talking to the local governments in these communities that you serve. Let's start tackling some of the readiness challenges now, so that when the money does come, some of the challenges that we see county to county, municipality to municipality can be smoothed out a little bit. I know it's a concern at every level of government. And so we can have the conversations up here, but also start the action at the most local level. I think it's really a roadmap for success right there.
So what keeps you up at night?
Everything.
A lot.
The whole program.
Netflix.
I got a 12-year-old daughter. That's what.
Drive to Survive. It's a great show.
Which one's that?
Drive to Survive. That was what coming up last night.
I'll check that one out.
Yeah, check it out.
So I was going to say on this, great answers, especially Netflix. I think that for me, it's, everyone in the ecosystem here is playing a different role. It's a big set of tasks that's been handed out to them. And ARC gets to sit on the side and kind of see what's happening. And my concern is that someone's going to take their eye off the ball, or maybe someone's new to the game and they're not getting the resources or help that they need. So that's why ARC has been working to partner and make grant programs that are available for folks to get trained up and get capacity. I wanted to mention two of them real quick. One of them is a grant we just awarded to an entity called Connect Humanity. They currently have applications open. They're looking for 50 communities throughout the Appalachian region that they can bring through a master planning process that'll end with applications to whatever grant programs that they're eligible for, as well as helping them find private sources of funding for match or even direct investment in networks. So connecthumanity.fund/arise is the URL, or you can come find me. We can talk about it. Applications are open for that right now. I'd encourage you to apply. The other program is free. It's offered by the National Broadband Resource Hub starting next week. So that's broadbandhub.org. They're putting together what they're calling an Appalachian broadband boot camp, which is great, right? Well-named program. So if you have someone in your office who is new to broadband, or if you want to polish up your skills, it's going to be hour-long sessions. There's going to be 6 of them over like a 12-week period, covering everything from the very basic aspects of broadband and learning, what is fiber and what is copper plant? What are all these terms I've never heard of before? All the way through how you build partnerships and put together grant applications. So that's the top post, I think, on ARC's LinkedIn page right now is an invitation to apply for that. That's free. I'd love to see participation maxed out for Pennsylvania.
So one thing that's keeping us up at night is we're now our 4th round of funding, and we can now look back at our round 1 and 2 awards and see what happened. And what happened in those awards is the market moved away from them. You have a budget submitted in 2018, and now you're living with that budget 4 years later. And make-ready costs have changed, the labor costs have changed, everything's changed. And so what do you do? And so it's very tough, because when you awarded a grant, we can't go back and do, but we just did that. And so what we did is, with our round 1, 2 awards, who were over, project costs were overrun, we've now set aside $230-some million to go back and help them. So we made the commitment, probably at the cost of opportunity of funding future projects, but it's the right thing to do. You know, some of these folks just got caught. Some of them made mistakes, to be honest with you. I mean, I have one project, they completely blew the make-ready costs. Frankly, it's their fault. But I can't blame the whole cohort of funding from 2 rounds where everyone's having the same problem. And so that's one thing that's keeping us up at night, is what's going to happen in round 3 and 4. As the market moves away from these budgets, you put in a budget, and you're kind of stuck with it. And that's been our biggest challenge. We did what we could, but you know, money doesn't come off trees, right, everyone? I mean, so we're doing the best we can to address those.
So we have a couple more questions, but I wanted to at least, like, what are your final, left to right here, Nicole, what do you want to make sure we know?
Thank you. That's a perfect setup. So this also ties back to truly what keeps me up at night. I think that so many of the communities that we are most nervous about are also the folks who may not be in this room today. The ones who are not engaged, who don't have the time or interest or the right person in the room to know how broadband can really enrich lives. So I ask all of you, number one, stay engaged, because these are really hard problems, and if they were easier, we would have fixed them by now. They cannot be solved without you individually, every single person in this room, and every single person that you know in your community. And if you know somebody who isn't really sure, I don't know, there's this like crazy lady talking about beads all the time, please, you know, find an opportunity to connect me to them. I would really appreciate it. That's a personal favor I'm asking, because I want to make sure that we're reaching the folks who have not been reached, the folks who don't see this as a priority, who don't have the time. NTIA has resources where we can help. So if I'm lucky enough to be in this job, which is truly a dream job, then let me go out, meet folks where they are, and see how we can bring them in, because those are the folks who ultimately, you know, will need these resources as much as anybody else. So I'm giving you all homework. I hope you're okay with that.
Crazy bead lady. That's a great title you gave yourself there.
New business card.
Yeah, that's good.
Tell Levin.
So for me, I'd point you right back to those 2 training opportunities that I just mentioned. I think that educating yourself and becoming as conversant in these things as possible is kind of what I would be focused on if I were you. So that's the Appalachian Broadband Bootcamp and the Connect Humanities Appalachian Digital Equity Accelerator. Go check those 2 opportunities out and get ready.
I would just say, my job is to help you get funded, or tell you the truth and say it's not a good source of funding for you. I do that just as often. So you contact me. I'm readily available on any website as Contact Us. You look at the state, you can pull my information up. I've had so many conversations with so many folks very early in the process. I've told them straight what we're looking like, what the funding looks like, what the strings are attached, and we get project specific, whether we can help you or not. And I would encourage you to reach out to me so that I'm not wasting your time, so it's all good. I'm always ready to have a conversation with anybody who wants to.
So we threw a lot at you, right? A lot of information. So I'll leave you with something tangible. We are actively working on developing a statewide map. So we have Penn State Extension under contract. Wave, Tom. Woo. We are layering in as much data as we can get our hands on. We understand that no single data set tells the tale, accurately depicts some of the issues that we have. So we're trying to get our hands on as much data as possible, and we're committed to making that statewide map public facing. So that is something we're working toward. That will be used as a tool to guide our investments to ensure that this is a transparent process as we start to allocate funds, as the authority stands up programs and starts to make competitive grant awards. So I'll leave you with that tangible work that we're doing on that front with the statewide map, and I think Dr. Kopko will have some information to add on that this afternoon, so stay tuned.
All right, well, we are standing in the way of lunch here. A couple things. Back to Nicole, your advice earlier. If you haven't reached, if you're a county or municipality or someone that needs to start, just call someone. I called Lance. Lance was the first call I made. And he said, here, this is what we do. And he was very humble about it. And he said, this is what we did. We literally copied and pasted what he was doing in Beaver County. So call someone. Part two, I want to thank SPC for this. I mean, this has been huge to bring this all together. I also want to thank everyone in the staff of actually putting together, but I also want to call out the actual ISPs, the fiber providers themselves. If this was economical, it would already be done. It's not economical. That's the point. And so it's very challenging for them to put their capital together to put these plans together. And we wanted, or I at least wanted to end on this, is that the slide that you see right here, we put out an RFP, we received on 10 polygons, we received 7 different companies had bid. And you know, poor Mike, I felt for you when you said one company responded. I mean, we're blessed in Washington County that we've had 7 different companies, more than that, involved in our process. 47 proposals, 6,000 targets, and if you added that interest, it's $280 million of interest. And so the point I wanted to leave on this is they've said a couple times here, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for all of us. And so thank you for the ISPs, thank you for SPC, and did this panel put fun in funding? Come on now. Come on, more. All right, thank you guys, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, very important. Hold on, please, sorry. When done, notify lunches in the hallway for buffet lines while waiting for the talk to sponsor tables. So thank you, sponsors. See you.